have with me Sam Nwoko, the Deputy Editor of the Nigerian Tribune. Good to have you here once again, Sam Nwoko.
Good to be here once again. Good morning, viewers.
Some have talked about centralization of resources, and they have talked about how deep federalism is in Nigeria. How has that affected Nigeria in terms of wealth distribution and the agitation of some states, especially when it comes to 13% derivation? There has been a question mark on that for a long, long time. What's your thought on all of this? And how do we mix all of this together to eventually get to that point where Nigeria feels that wealth distribution is the way to go, or if that's not the way to go?
Thank you. Nigeria's oil wealth has remained one of the most opaque items in our life as a nation. And in being this opaque, they have the relevant petroleum agencies funded and run by the national government, which always has its own peculiar ways of doing things. And those peculiar ways are almost not known to Nigerians. To a large extent, we find that whatever the NNPC does remains in the NNPC. And whatever the other subsidiaries of the NNPC do, they remain there. So over the years, the agitations have been, springing up here and there, and until the return of democracy in 1999, nobody knew that some of these things could be whittled down. Some of these things could be deregulated, the deregulation of that sector. And eventually the government did not deregulate everything. They deregulated the downstream sector. So when they deregulated the downstream sector, they kept the upstream sector. The upstream sector is the far into the ocean and so on. That is why a state like Cross River is finding it difficult. They are still battling with Akwa Ibom State still today on some of the oil wells that belong to that region, So that's why many times when we talk about oil and oil-related issues, nobody mentions Eket in Akwa Ibom State, which is a huge oil-producing area. But we really look at many towns in River State. We look at Boni, we look at Finima, we look at the Kalabari areas and all those areas. And we also look at what brought about the Niger Delta agitation. So, to a large extent, we don't understand how this run, our oil life is run. So, coming now to answer your question in direct terms, it's a huge change from the norms which we know about our oil life. And we want to see how the NNPCL, which is what it is now, and the other areas of its operations, the Petroleum Pipeline Management Agency, the Nigerian Upstream Downstream Management, the refineries, all the subsidiaries, let's see how they are going to talk about what has happened now. Because today now we have a gazetted executive order which has changed the way our oil revenue will be handled. Okay,
if you look at the current framework in Nigeria, especially when it comes to upstream and downstream oil sector, do you think the federal government's control of oil revenues has strengthened national unity, or it has further disintegrated that into lesser state independence?
Now, if you take what the government has done, let me even give you something from the past. I remember a minister from Ibadan here. He was the Minister of State for Finance. His name is Remi Babalola.
Right.
He did several things. He made very eloquent presentations to ensure that oil revenue in Nigeria is paid into the federation account. Part of the things he did was to say that NNPC cannot be an independent financing, a kind of independent revenue center by itself, whereas it is a product of the federal government. He made very eloquent arguments, very valid arguments. But the powers that be at that time, because it was always a debate at the Federal Executive Council, and he didn't win, not because he didn't have very good arguments, but because some people, those who are benefiting from that sector, did not allow him to achieve his aim. But everybody left that place knowing, in fact, he became a pariah among the ministers, especially the ministers from certain parts of the country. He became a pariah. They didn't want to, they are like, you want to remove our source of income, our pot of soup.
The cash cow.
You want to kill our cash cow, you want to remove our pot of soup. So he did that, but they understood the eloquence in the sense in what he was saying. But they didn't allow it, they didn't work. Before then, there was also somebody, I'm trying to remember the man's name, he's from the north too. He made a similar argument. In fact, that one, they shot him down because he's from that part of the country. So all I'm trying to see here is the achievement. I remember last served under President President Obasanjo. That was how long ago this thing has been on the table. And it was flowing from the issue of deregulation of that time. So today, that which had been a very serious misnomer looks like it has been corrected now, because I personally do not believe that the NNPC should be getting money and spending it the way it likes. And people will run, the government will now run to it with the cap in hand to say, give us some money, and remittances are according to how they wish and so on. That is why today, when you want to open the books of the NNPC, it is something you can't complete. You can't comprehend. So for me, it is not going to win the states of what they, but when more money enters into the federation account, there will be more money for states to share. How, whether it now gets to the common man and so on, is another kettle of fish. That one is another problem in itself. But for now, let's see how this...
okay, now let's talk about 30% reduction for oil exploration.
Yes.
Which has been a question for a long time. Why do we have to spend 30% of income on exploration, on things that are not even sure? Why can't we concentrate on what we currently have? And if there are times we think we need to explore, we will do that. But a continuous reduction of 30%.
Yes, ad infinitum. Deducting the money, whether we are exploring or not. Now, that is why...
And where is the money going?
That is why we have, during Buhari, there was this, I don't want to call it a media blitz, which we did over the Bauchi Basin, Gombe Basin. And they said that time that we had discovered oil in the north. In fact, since I was a child, there had been exploration in the Lake Chad Basin. That one, we've been hearing about it since we were children. Then the Gombe Basin, and so on and so forth. During Buhari, I remember very well that there were photographs, there was inauguration, there was jubilation in the north that we have found oil and things like that. And that's because NNPC set aside a huge chunk of its revenue. In fact, it's a compulsory deduction because you just have to pay it whether you like it or not. So now it is going to be at the discretion of the federal government, because all that revenue is coming to the federation account. If you now have to explore, you have to give us some very good... They are exploring in Lagos. Right. Not many people know. There is still going on in the, I think it's Badagry Basin and things like that. So the entire change in the fabric of the NNPC revenue and expenditure is going to mean a whole lot for both the agency. Now you will see that NNPC will begin to employ people you and I know, unlike before now, when they will employ people you don't know. Because as I day here, so I don't know who they work for NNPC. You won't hear people talk about it, you just see them they will just be... So all I'm trying to say is that a lot of things
there'll be no transparency in what
there is, in fact, the opacity is alarming. It's mind-blowing. You know nothing that goes on in NNPC. I once met someone who works in NNPC, and he changed that when Volkswagen Jetta came, they will buy them new cars and so on. So I'll keep wondering. I say, this place where they work, how do you, because he used to change cars so very often, and new cars. He said, no, he said they will just bring the cars and say, sign for it, and he will sign for it. You know, so that is even some of the minute, the younger, the low people, you know. So this change, I think, is desirable so that we can understand the framework within which that NNPC operates. And with the Petroleum Industry Act, which Pengasan pointed at, these changes are still going to create some new items for us to look at.
So these new arrangements by the federal government, does it align with the spirit of the Constitution, or does it contradict the idea of federalism in the first place?
Now, for me, on that, because I had thought about that argument, when a law is inconsistent with the provisions of the Constitution, that law remains subject to the dictates of the Constitution. So Petroleum Industry Act, is subject to what the Constitution says. But now the president did not come by way of law to alter the Petroleum Industry Act, but he came by way of executive order. In fact, they gazetted,
which overrides whatever it is.
So
in the
whatever it is, they are going to implement. And he has also promised in the speech he made towards that, he said they are going to do a comprehensive amendment of that law.
To be ratified, to suit the executive order.
Yes, that is on the one hand. On the other hand, when the Petroleum Industry Act law, when it was the bill, I know very well that the bill presented, pushed and fought for by Desiani Alison Madueke, which we have vilified today, is completely different from what was eventually passed. In fact, what was passed was like a carcass of that bill of that time. But the woman had already become so vilified that if anything she says, nobody will listen to her.
Count anymore.
Nobody will count her as anything. So she had to keep quiet. But I know that the law that was passed, that is being implemented, is a carcass. It's like a skeleton of what that law was originally. So today, the chicken is coming home to roost, one way or the other.
All right, now let's talk about the 13% derivation. Most people have spoken about this, and it has raised so much dust, especially in the oil-producing states. When it comes to exploration, in some places, is 13% derivation enough for oil-producing states?
This one interests me so much because I was neck deep. I was in River State.
Because compared to the damages done to these places,
to those communities,
Diogoni and so many other places,
I was in River
which
State,
the cleanup has not been completed till today.
I was serving as a correspondent in River State when the 13% derivation was on the front burner of Nigeria's politics. Dr. Peter Odili was the governor of River State. Let me speak from what happened in River State. I know a man called Peter Side. What's this Baba called? This man, I will remember his name. He's dead now. He was an elderly man. He was the one. I even wrote about him. Now, when this 13% derivation came, it was fought vehemently against. In fact, the derivation the people wanted was more than that. In fact, that's when we began to hear of offshore and onshore dichotomy. Now, for many communities, if you go to a place like Masambri, if you go to a place like, there's Akukutoru, there's Asaritoru, there is Degema, there is Buguma, Abonema. If you go to those communities, you will know that Nigeria don't suffer. If you go to Ijo communities, the backwaters, if you are traveling from, say, Akinima to Engeni, if you are going into the hinterland, if you enter through Ahoda, and you are going to maybe Yogba or Ndoni, and you will see what is happening in those communities, you will weep for those people. We also have to remember that things like that brought about Niger Delta agitation. Things like that brought about Niger Delta militancy. Things like that brought about the clash, which became the problem we are still dealing with today. So much that Obasanjo had to go to the Niger Delta and say, if you think you are strong, bring your guns, let's face ourselves. And they told him, say, no, that is not what we want. We want you to do something about things that are happening in our environment. Eventually, that's what gave rise to people like Asari Dokubo, Felix Tuodolo, Kimse Okoko, you know, and now people who are benefiting from it, like a government, these ones are even the newer generation of those agitations. When the agitation was very hot, in fact, I had to run away from a place called Agri Road, because it's the street where the Ijaw National Council had its headquarters. I think it's number 4. It's on the street corner at Agri. It's a very popular place. We used to go there, you know, sit down so that you can hear these people. You can hear the arguments. You can feel what they feel. It's in old Port Harcourt town. Now, when all these things were happening, Harold Dapabriye was part of the people who were called to say, Chief Harold Dapabriye is late now. He is the man that came up with the word Niger Delta. And then they came up with the word derivation. Give us something as a compensation for what you are doing to our environment. It is what people like Ken Saro-Wiwa were fighting for. It is what led to the ruining, so to say, of the life of the Ogoni 9 and the Ogoni 13 and all the Ogoni issues, which led to the formation of the Oputa panel, which had to hear that, and so on and so forth. But overall, if you go and consider what is taking place in those places and see the backwardness in Ogoni, up till the time I left Rivers State, I know very well that in places like Pean, in places like even Bori, as cosmopolitan as Bori was by then, places like Kedere and Bidere and so on. Bicycle is what people use as a means of transportation. Bicycle.
Was that bad?
It was that bad. I know, because I did a story on it, that the place we read in social studies as children, Afam Power Station, where you had a power station, I knew that the time I was in Rivers State up to 2005-06, there was no public power supply in Afam, where we generated power, where we read about Afam Power Station. I knew that the conductors that were used to supply electricity to Port Harcourt was copper, which made the lights always low. If you turn on light in Port Harcourt, I was living in Diobu, I was living in my one, you know, the lights go day low, and it was old delay that came and he changed everything to say, okay, let's even improve. And the final of it is that in the whole of Bayelsa State of that time, there was no public electric. Bayelsa State in its entirety was not on the national grid. They were using gas electricity generated by companies like I wouldn't know if I can mention them, Ajib, Chevron, all those are oil exploration companies. And that was why when the agitation came, when people saw development in other places and saw the condition they were living in. So, to answer your question in one sentence, 13% was just like a token. Something like Ajegba Mapami kind of thing. Just take and leave, let my room. So, I know that the people demanded for more than 13%, and they demanded for at least 25%. But the government, I mean, it's all part of negotiation. They gave them 13%, but it still does not compensate. Because construction in Bayelsa, when Alamesia was the governor, a road, a kilometer of road in a place like Oyo State was not up to 500 million naira. No, 100 million. Back in the days when naira was still naira, before it came to 1,000 plus. Construction of a kilometer of road was in the neighborhood of 100 million naira. But that time, Construction of a kilometer of road was already like 500 million in places like that, because you use at least a year to sand fill. When you sand fill for 1 year, you now go back when the sand had sunk before you now begin the sand earthwork on the place where you want to build roads. So it was that bad. So for me, I think 13% was, they took it and said, okay, at all kind of thing. Yes. So now, on whether it is going to create dichotomy and alter the revenue sharing formula and so on, I think it's going to increase it, because states will come together and say, now that we have this, we can get this. Okay. And the dreams of people like Remi Babalola and Dahatu, that man, I'm trying to remember his name, is now coming true.
Okay, now you mentioned something about the offshore and onshore
dichotomy. Yeah,
it was a major flashpoint, and was whether the question was whether offshore oil revenue should count towards derivation. Now, all producing states argue that it should. The federal government initially excluded offshore revenue, which led to the legal battle. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the federal government, but political pressure led to the passage of the allocation of revenue, abolition of dichotomy, and the application of the Principle of Derivation Act. This law ended the offshore-onshore dichotomy, allowing offshore revenues to be included in derivation calculation. So, if not for the court case, so it would have been just one of it.
Yes, it should have been one of it. And
it would be less than what they currently get.
Yes. You know, Ondo State was part of the suit, and especially Cross River State, because most of the oil Cross River has is offshore.
Offshore.
And once you get to 32 nautical miles, from what we read and what we learned, once you get to 32 nautical miles, it belongs to the federal government. So, Akwa Ibom has a cat. You know, we used to have a team in this country that was playing very well, that was in the National League, called Mobile Pegasus. They were based in Eket. And if you go play them that time, in fact, it was a joy to go and cover matches in those places back in the time. Why is this? Because the oil revenue was there and you could see it. So with that sheet, it also ensured that the abolition of the dichotomy brought about a slight marginal increase in the revenue accruing to the states. But now, with NNPCs, because sometimes NNPC will not pay into the revenue account, they will tell you that they spent this and did that and so on, like as I talked about the opacity in their operations. Now, everything will be, everybody go to see and kuro like this and know that NNPC, no, we know. Because I remember people like Amechi agitated so very, this same Rotimi Amechi. Now, there is going to be a world of difference.
Okay, now let me ask you this, just before we go. Do you see genuine political will for restructuring revenue control in Nigeria?
That's a very big one. One of the things I have decided to console myself with is that right now we are taking steps. We are taking steps, you know, and I am sure that the more we grow, because what all this tells me is that nationhood is a journey indeed. Remi Babalola had it as a vision. He fought. He did all within his power, but it didn't work. But today, it has come on at the snap of a finger. Executive bill, gazetted. Bam, go and implement. It's just like subsidy is gone. So it's a journey, and already the steps have been taken. So on whether it is going to be, I mean, for sure it's going to revolutionize our revenue system. It's going to revolutionize our expenditure system. Yes, more money for the people who see the money, and more money for those who are at the right places to make demands for the money. But I don't know how it's going to affect the masses. But from the look of things, it is easier to drag a Sheyi Makinde and say, Your Excellency, we can block the kind of protest that took place at the
National Assembly.
Circular Road.
Okay.
That eventually got the attention of
the governor.
He will come and say, this thing not be Mr. Tam, and so on and so forth. He will come to you and explain. People saw him. Abi, he met with them, and explained. So it is easier to get at a Seyi Makinde than it will be to get at a Bola Tinubu.
If it means more money for oil-producing states, what does it say for other states that are not producing?
It cuts across, because the revenue increase means you get more from the federal account. Allocation. It's just that the oil-producing states are going to get more by way of the derivation, which still stands. So that's only the difference. If you were getting 5 naira before, you can get 550 or 600 or even 700. While your oil-producing counterparts will get as much as maybe 800. That's just the difference. But whether or whether permit that language, it is still an increase in the revenue for the states, all the states.
Okay, if you had to recommend one reform that will bring a balance to fiscal, bring fiscal balance in Nigeria, what would that be?
Now, it will be first for the government to agree that what accrues to the federal government is way too much. Okay. The 52-point-something% they get, for me as an individual, I think I mean, let the federal government shed some of its powers, and let that state you told us to go and hold responsible, let them get more money. Let local government autonomy be indeed. I know that in 1999 to 2003 plus up to 2005-06, local government autonomy, we had local government autonomy. In Rivers State, Ogubolo local government was not a PDP state, PDP local government. Ogubolo, there are two local governments in Okrika land, Okrika and Ogubolo local governments. Ogubolo was not PDP, it was APP. Okrika local government was PDP. In the same enclave. The entire Ogoni land was mostly APP. They are always, as people say on the streets, they are always in the opposition. But the governor was a PDP with all the other areas, including Wike's Obiakpo then, before he became the chairman, and Ikwere local government, Ahoda East, Ahoda West, Abu Audua, Andoni, Opobo, Nkoro, Boni, and so on and so forth. We are all, all the upland, Emoha, and so on and so forth, Ikwere, Eche, we are all PDP. So he had the majority. And when the money comes, it goes to those local governments. And you see what they were doing. That's why Wike was performing very well as a local government chairman. But now, things have changed. Governors have assumed
the responsibility
of
local
dictating
governments,
how local governments are run, because the Constitution, one way or the other, allows that. So, and that makes the difference. So what I expect to see in terms of what the revenue does and how it happens is that if the federal government can, continue the reforms, expand it, bring in more for the states, give them more responsibilities, shed some of the roads, federal road, state road, and so on, that kind of thing, shed some of these things, allow local issues, land matters, and so on, not to go beyond states where the land is domiciled, since the governor is the person in charge of the land. Let those things not go to Supreme Court, which does not know how, So when the federal government sheds some of these responsibilities and let the judiciary get its money as it should, the legislature as it should, and so on, I'm sure it is going to be a very huge step forward for this country.
Just to back what you said of, the federal government currently gets 52.68%, while state governments, all 36 states get 26.72%, and 774 local governments get 20.60%. And that's, for me, just like you said, there's a little bit of the margin is
the federal government. There's a road that passes through my community in Ikwano local government area of Abia State. It's called Umahi. I call it Benin Road. When I was growing up, when they took me to the village, my mom told me that road was constructed long before the war. He said it was white people that constructed the road. The road has only been receiving what I would call palliative repairs up till now. And it is less than 30 kilometers from Umuahia to Ikot Ekpene. So if someone like Akpabio is going home and he's not flying, if he finds himself, say to do something, instead of flying, he can just travel and enjoy the country and pass through that road, and he will enter his community. But he won't, because the road is bad. Now they have awarded that road, the governor of the state now, OT, who is a product of a proper recruitment system, because he took the war fought by Professor Nena of Futo, who said, no, I'm not going to declare a wrong candidate. So now he has done the road, they are doing the road, they are working on it. And all I'm trying to say is that if the federal government can say that Umuahia Ikot Ekpene road, I mean, they don't have any reason to, I mean, waiting concern federal government with those roads. Look at the road from Oleyo, Chipa Garage, down to that community is a federal road. The road from JLN to Molete,
and that responsibility should go to
the state, a federal road,
because they know the
so
direction. Why
will the federal government be administering those roads, whereas the people who use those roads don't even sometimes remember or even know, have an idea that those roads belong to the federal government? We can allow Abuja Lokoja Road, we can allow Lagos Ibadan Express Road, we can allow Benin Asaba, Shagam, all those roads, the trunk A roads. Let the federal government continue to maintain those ones. But the other ones that go into the hinterland, let the states manage those roads. Then we'll be able to hold the states more responsible. We'll be able to say, Mr. Governor, in fact, we can go and sit in the government house. By the time he flogs us for 3-4 days, he will say, we allow people, permit the language. Let us listen to them. And then we'll be able to get something. But the federal government is far from the people. So those are some of the little things I think we can do to shed some of the powers which has kept the government far from the people.
All right, Sam Oko, thank you for joining us on the show this morning.
Yeah, thank you. And finally, the man I'm trying to remember, his name is Haman Tukor.
Okay.
Yes, he was in charge of the revenue mobilization. He was the chairman that time. He also fought for the revenue of the NNPC.
Going straight to the federation account.
So he also failed. In fact, his own he couldn't fight as much as Remy Babalola did. They quickly told him.
They shut him down.
They shut him down.
All right, thank you, Sam Oko. And then as Nigeria confronts economic pressures and renewed calls for restructuring, the issue of oil revenue control remains central to the future of governance and the federal balance. The challenge is finding equilibrium, preserving national unity while encouraging fiscal responsibility and innovation at the state level. Appreciation to Sam Oko of the Nigerian Tribune for his insight. And this has been the big story on Daybreak Live. Stay informed, stay engaged. The conversation continues. Samson Balogo is my name. Good morning.